According to the Mishnah, in Mishnah in Ta'anit, chapter 4, Mishnah 6, there were 5 calamities that have affected this world on the 9th of Av that we commemorate today. First, we have the 12 spies sent by Moshe to observe the land from their mission. When 10 of these spies came back, telling the Jewish people that it would be very difficult, if not impossible, to conquer the land, the rest of the nation, the rest of the tribe of Israel, mourned. And God said, if you are mourning about this, I will forever give you something to mourn about. And it was here that God decided and God decreed that the generation that was in the desert would not be the generation that would reach the Jordan. That most of the people would have to die in the desert rather than to see the land. And only their children would merit seeing the land of Israel. And that was decreed on the 9th of Av, so many years ago. But we really think about Tisha B'Av in the other 4 calamities, most specifically the first and second temples. The first temple was built by King Solomon and destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar in 586 BCE. According to the Tanakh, the first temple's destruction began on the 7th of Av and continued through the 10th. The actual destruction began on the 9th of Av and continued to burn throughout the 10th of Av. The second temple, built by Ezra and Nehemiah, was then destroyed later by the Romans in 70 of the Common Era, scattering everyone from the Holy Land, and that current exile is till today. Later, the Romans crushed the Bar Kokhba rebellion and destroyed the city of Beitar, killing 500,000 Jewish civilians on August 4th, 135 of the Common Era. Following the book and 5, the Bar Kokhba rebellion, Roman commander Turnus Rufus then plowed the site of Jerusalem surrounding this area in 135 CE. These 5 calamities represent how we have understood this day, Tisha B'Av, to be a sad day. And of course, we also think about this day and commemorate the many other sad things that have occurred throughout the Jewish history and narrative because of our exile. So were it not for the Roman destruction of the temple and the Roman exile of the Jewish people from the land of Israel, specifically Jerusalem, we believe that the tragedies of the pogroms, the tragedies of the Crusades, the tragedy of the Holocaust, and many other tragedies, all the way up until our current day Jewish tragedies of the Tree of Life Synagogue, maybe even our current tragedies of humanity in general, would not have occurred if the Jewish people were not exiled from this land. And we are told that this all is a base of all of these tragedies come from this Roman exile. And we're told that the reason the Romans destroyed the temple, that the Romans turned in their partnership with the Jewish people, was because of a very simple act of sinat chinam, the very simple act of a baseless hatred. This baseless hatred we discover in the Gemara in Gittin 55b, which we'll look at today. Kamsa ubar Kamsa, Haruv Yerushalayim. The Gemara relates a story of 2 men, Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. And the Gemara tells us that this story, the argument of these 2 men, Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, Haruv Yerushalayim, destroyed Jerusalem. Dehahu Gavra derachme Kamsa uvad divrei bar Kamsa avad sudata. This is that there was a certain man whose friend was named Kamsa, but whose enemy was named Bar Kamsa. So we have these two men, Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. And then we have a third individual, an unnamed individual. And what's very important here, the most important part of the story is, there's this man and he has an enemy named Kamsa, a friend named Kamsa, and an enemy named Bar Kamsa. I assumed always these two men were not related, but just had similar names. Someone with the last name Isaac, another with the last name Isaacson. And we don't really know why, but there's a third individual who is enemies with one and friends with another. And the absence of knowing what the actual argument or reason for their being enemies, that absence is very telling of what the importance of the story is. Because the destruction of the temple is because of a baseless hatred. And that baseless hatred rises and rises and rises. So we get so entrenched with the hatred and the arguments that we don't really even know what the original story was about. So here we have the story. And there was this other man, we call them this certain man, Dahahu Gavra, and he had this friend named Kamsa, but the enemy named Bar Kamsa. And the man made a very large feast, and he sent an invitation. Amar le l'shmaya zil ite li Kamsa azal ite le Bar Kamsa. He sent an invitation through a messenger to Kamsa, but the address was labeled incorrectly, or the messenger made a mistake, and he accidentally brought Bar Kamsa, the enemy of the person making the party. Ata ashkache dahachu yitev amarle machdihachu gavra. The man who was hosting the feast was very surprised. He suddenly saw his enemy, perhaps his worst enemy, sitting at the feast. And the host said to Bar Kamsa, that man is the enemy of that man. That is, you are my enemy. He said in sort of a passive-aggressive way, you are my enemy. And he goes on to say, Amar leho'il v'ate shabakin v'heven lacha d'meimad achli v'shivitana. What are you doing here? Leave. And Bar Kamsa says back to him, well, I'm already here. Please don't embarrass me. Please don't make me leave. I'll just stay and I'll give you the money for what I ate and what I drank. But please don't make me leave. It's very embarrassing. Gemara continues. Amarle lo amarle. He said, no, you have to go. And Bar Kamsa says back to him, I will give you money for almost half. I'll give you money for the half of the party. The party is going to cost you a lot of money. I'll pay for half of this. Please, don't make me leave. I don't want to be embarrassed. So even though Bar Kamsa offered to pay for half the party, the owner of the party, the host of the party, said, no, you still have to go. And Bar Kamsa said back to him, please, just let me stay. Don't make a whole scene. I will give you the entire money. I'll pay for the entire party. Please don't throw me out. And Amarle Lo, the host of the party, said no. And Naktele Biyide Ukme Afke. He grabbed him by his hand, the host of the party. He grabbed Bar Kamsa, pulled him up, stood him up, and walked him out in the most embarrassing way possible, making a whole scene, we assume. And Bar Kamsa is very upset. So we see a very disappointed, very frustrated individual. We again have no idea what would make the host so upset. We have to imagine that Bar Kamsa did something very bad. But the fact that the Gemara leaves it out means that perhaps, they don't even know what made them so angry. It certainly wasn't important enough to mention in the Gemara. The Gemara is a work that takes 7.5 years to finish. If you read one page a day, it still takes 7.5 years to finish. It's a very long piece of work. And still the Gemara is absent of this point of what made the host so angry to want to throw Bar Kamsa out of the party. So we continue, and now we see how angry Bar Kamsa is. We also see a little bit of how Bar Kamsa could be a better individual. Amar, Ho'il v'havu yitive Rabbanan. After being cast of the party, Bar Kamsa said to himself, you know what, when I was being cast out of the party, there were a lot of people there. There are a lot of big rabbis there. There are a lot of big rabbis there, and they didn't try to stop what the host was doing. He embarrassed me, not just in front of his family, not just in front of a few friends we knew. He embarrassed me in front of the rabbis, and the rabbis didn't even say anything. So he's not only angry now at the host, he's now angry at the rabbis and maybe the entire Jewish community. And so after being cast out, he said, since all the rabbis were sitting there and they didn't say anything, even though they know how humiliated it was to me, I will go and tell them to the emperor, the king, the Roman king, the emperor. He went and he said to the emperor this lie, really. Amarle lekesar mardubacha. He said, the Jews have rebelled against you. And the emperor said to him, who is this? Who says that this is the case? And Bar Kamsa said to him, he created basically this fictional, he expanded on this controversy because he remembered this law about whether or not you can sacrifice an animal if it has a blemish on it. So once an animal is injured, you can't offer it as a sacrifice in the temple. And the emperor knows this, but the emperor wanted to test to see if the Jews were going to rebel against him. And so the emperor wants to send an animal to sacrifice. And he gives Bar Kamsa the animal, and he says, send them an offering, and it will be brought in honor of the government, and we'll see if they sacrifice it. The emperor went and he sent him with the best calf. While Bar Kamsa was coming with the calf to the temple, he made a very small blemish on the calf's lips. And some say it was elsewhere. But it was a blemish, but according to them, it's not a blemish, or I think really according to them, the Romans didn't know that it was an injury. And therefore, when Bar Kamsa brought this animal to the temple, the priest would not offer it because of the blemish. But also they could not explain to the Romans, who did not consider it to be a problem. So the blemish notwithstanding, the sages thought to sacrifice the animal. Even though a very important halacha, the Jewish law tells us that they can't sacrifice an animal brought by anyone, the government or anybody else, if it has any kind of injury on it. An injury, we call an injury. But even though the rabbi said, if we don't offer this sacrifice, there's going to be a lot of trouble. And so they wanted to maintain peace. And this rabbi said, Ben Zechariah ben Avakala said, if the priests do that, people will say that blemish may be sacrificed as an offering on the altar. But if we do not sacrifice it, then we must prevent Bar Kamsa from reporting this to the emperor. And the sages even thought to kill him so that he would not go and speak to them. They were ready to kill Bar Kamsa to shut him up. So there are a lot of problematic actors, a lot of problematic characters in this story. And this is a very dark point, I think, in the story. The rabbis were willing to kill, or at least there was an option, to kill Bar Kamsa so that he could not tell the emperor that they were not going to offer the sacrifice. Rabbi Zechariah said to them, if you kill him, people will say that no one makes a blemish on a sacrificial animal is to be killed. As a result, they did nothing, and Bar Kamsa's slander was accepted by the authorities, and consequently, this is how the Jews and the Romans, the war between the Jews and the Romans began. And of course, this is how we come to the Romans winning the war against the Jews and against the Romans. And eventually the Romans win and kick us out of Jerusalem, kick us out of Israel, and we continue in our exile of this land up until today. So this action meant that we were exiled forever. These very small series of events. Now, what's not here, of course, is that it's not only that Bar Kamsa was a turn on the Jewish people. It's not only that the host was his enemy. It's not only that the host would not allow him to stay. It's not only that the rabbis didn't say anything and that were willing to kill Bar Kamsa, that the conflict of the Romans and the Jews was always fraught from the very beginning. The Second Temple, when the Jews came back in the times of Ezra and Nehemiah, and Ezra and Nehemiah rebuilt the Second Temple, it was not the glory of the First Temple in that the Jewish people were not really in charge of the temple. The Romans were really in charge of Israel, as they were in the rest of their empire, had various places, various civilizations that they had conquered. And so really perhaps it's only a matter of time before the Romans found some reason to exile the Jewish people. But still we see this as a very important straw on the camel's back. And perhaps the relationship of the Jewish people and the Romans was always so delicate, like it was with anyone, that any time any of these civilizations that the Romans conquered, anytime they showed disobedience, the Romans were willing to get rid of their relationship. An injury we call an injury. But even though the rabbi said, if we don't offer this sacrifice, there's going to be a lot of trouble. And so they wanted to maintain peace. And this rabbi said, Ben Zechariah ben Avakala said, if the priests do that, people will say that blemish may be sacrificed as an offering on the altar. But if we do not sacrifice it, then we must prevent Bar Kamsa from reporting this to the emperor. And the sages even thought to kill him so that he would not go and speak to them. They were ready to kill Bar Kamsa to shut him up. So there are a lot of problematic actors, a lot of problematic characters in this story. And this is a very dark point, I think, in the story. The rabbis were willing to kill, or at least there was an option, to kill Bar Kamsa so that he could not tell the emperor that they were not going to offer the sacrifice. Rabbi Zechariah said to them, if you kill him, people will say that no one makes a blemish on a sacrificial animal is to be killed. As a result, they did nothing, and Bar Kamsa's slander was accepted by the authorities, and consequently, this is how the Jews and the Romans, the war between the Jews and the Romans began. And of course, this is how we come to the Romans winning the war against the Jews and against the Romans. And eventually the Romans win and kick us out of Jerusalem, kick us out of Israel, and we continue in our exile of this land up until today. So this action meant that we were exiled forever. These very small series of events. Now, what's not here, of course, is that it's not only that Bar Kamsa was turned on the Jewish people. It's not only that the host was his enemy. It's not only that the host would not allow him to stay. It's not only that the rabbis didn't say anything and that were willing to kill Bar Kamsa, that the conflict of the Romans and the Jews was always fraught from the very beginning. The Second Temple, when the Jews came back in the times of Ezra and Nehemiah, and Ezra and Nehemiah rebuilt the Second Temple, it was not the glory of the First Temple in that the Jewish people were not really in charge of the temple. The Romans were really in charge of Israel, as they were in the rest of their empire, had various places, various civilizations that they had conquered. And so really perhaps it's only a matter of time before the Romans found some reason to exile the Jewish people. But still we see this as a very important straw on the camel's back. And perhaps the relationship of the Jewish people and the Romans was always fraught and always dangerous. And a very slight thing could have shaken it off. And so the point really is that our own misbehavior, or the misbehavior of these gentlemen, the host of the party and Bar Kamsa, in their baseless hatred of each other, we say that caused the destruction of the temple as a lesson for all the other possible places where a little bit of infighting can cause trouble. But really what it is more than just a story of dominoes dropping and causing these major events. The real problem is that this existed, this baseless hatred was not only something that happened in the bubble of the story of Bar Kamsa. It is a story that must have existed throughout the Jewish community. Without that, it's hard to understand why the rabbis would make it such an important story, a story we tell each year. What I think is more important in the story is actually when the rabbis view the events, view the embarrassment of Bar Kamsa in front of everyone. It's at this time where we see that the rabbis perhaps weren't just scared of what to do. They were used to what happened. They were accustomed to people misbehaving in such a way. And they failed to do something about it time and again. And the Gemara picks out this slice of one event to show that this behavior and the ignorance of it, or the inability or disinterest in stopping this misbehavior, was what our sin was at this time. And it's to show us that there are various levels to what we call the big sin that destroyed the Second Temple. This sin, again, as I mentioned in the beginning, the sin being sinat chinam, baseless hatred. The base of that is that there is some kind of hatred, some kind of argument we have that festers and festers until we don't even know what the real argument is, just that we can't get over it. No one can apologize, no one can take the blame for it, and even if they do, it's hard to forgive that person because we get so angry about it. And again, the Gemara doesn't even mention what actually happened, just tells us that there was a friend and an enemy. So it's to tell us that life is too short. Life is too short to have these arguments that we don't air out. Life is too short to bear a grudge. And that these problems can get bigger and bigger until they affect all of the community. And the reason, you would think that this is not that big of a deal perhaps. Not worth it to cause the destruction of the temple. The first temple was destroyed for perhaps better reasons, if you can say. It was destroyed because of the three big sins that are so sinful that it is better to die than to commit these sins. The sin of murder, the sin of idol worship, and the sin of inappropriate sexual acts. The rabbis tell us that in the first temple, that's what caused that destruction. The second temple was destroyed because of baseless hatred. And this expulsion and this destruction caused the exile of the Jewish people from then all the way up until now, from 70 of the Common Era all the way up until this year of 2020 and into the future. We don't know how long. The sin of baseless hatred was perhaps worse because we are still in that exile. We are still in the exile of baseless hatred. That's what we have to work on. Because remember, the most important commandment in the Torah is not giving sacrifices. It's not keeping Shabbat. It's not keeping kosher. The most important commandment is Lahavta l'recha kamocha. The most important commandment is to love everyone as if we love ourselves. And that's not always an easy commandment. It means that our enemies we have to love still. It means people that did bad things against us, we don't have to turn our cheek. We don't always have to forgive immediately, but we have to try to find a way to get through it. Try to find a way to give kindness even if we are angry with them. And certainly, if there's no reason to really hate someone in this sin called sinat chinam, certainly those are times when we have to find a way to get together. In Israel, they have bumper stickers that say they say ahavat chinam. Instead of free hate, baseless hatred, they have signs that essentially say free love. Love for no reason, in order to counteract hatred for no reason. So Tisha B'Av is a day when we mark our destruction, but as we finish out these hours here already in the late afternoon of Tisha B'Av, we look to the future and we hope for a time when we can take our anger and be honest with our anger, but also look to ways to get past it.